We are live. Welcome to Off Script, a project of the Blue Room here on Substack. I am MaryAnn McKibben Dana, and I am very thrilled to have with me Clint Schnekloth. And he is a fellow pastor. I'm talking to you from Northern Virginia, and Clint is in Fayetteville, Arkansas at
hmm
Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. So good to get the PCUSA, ELCA connection there.
Yeah, thanks for the
Um,
invitation.
yeah, glad you could be here. So, um, why don't we just start with I'll share with the audience how and why I wanted to have you on, but just tell us a little bit about you, where people can find you online, work that you want to share and promote with our folks here, and then we'll
Sure.
dive into some questions as part of our off script series.
Well, if you did the basic things, I also uh, am a blogger on Substack, and I've been doing that a long time actually, since right before the turn of the millennium. So I've always blogged as Lutheran Confessions.
Nice.
I started out at Blogger.
Uh-huh.
I spent some time at Pathos, but now I do Substack.
That's
But it's called
cool.
Lutheran Confessions. And my biggest project that people might look for if they're interested is I published last year a guidebook to progressive church, which is exactly that. It's kind of a big picture guide to something that people don't always bring together anymore. You can read a lot of stuff about progressive Christianity, but not always with a focus on how you do that in a church context. And so
That's great.
that was that project.
Good. We will include a link to that in our show notes so people can check that out. And I am impressed because I started blogging at the end of 2003. And so I feel pretty geriatric when it comes to blogging. But if you are pre-millennium, then you have bested me by
Extra
years.
geriatric, yeah.
Yes. No, you're not a day over 29, I'm sure. It's just you were a prodigy blogger, right? So, well, really glad to have you here. And for those who are joining us, if you're not familiar with this series, what we are doing is having a series of conversations in conjunction with the book that I released back in April called Better Than Normal. And what I propose in that book is that there are a lot of aspects of our culture that are built for a certain kind of person. And often, if you don't fit that mold, you are told to get into the mold as best you can, or we make efforts to accommodate you as somehow out of the norm. And what I want to propose is that we create a series of values and do some culture change to just eliminate this whole idea of a default or a norm that really does not work for a lot of people, whether it's neurodivergence or LGBTQ identity, gender, race, all of these kinds of things. And so, Clint, I really wanted to talk with you because you shared a chapter, and I don't know if it was a chapter from the book that you're referring to, but it was about neurodivergence and how to make room. And I thought, here's somebody I want to chat with about that. So I don't know if you would be willing to talk a little bit about that particular uh,
Oh
chapter
yeah.
or that topic. Yeah,
Yeah, I've been very slowly turning the book into an audiobook, and I just read a chapter
got it.
uh on my on the blog. And I've been doing that really slowly. So like I'm like maybe three quarters of the way through the book. Um
Great.
but whatever. Maybe that's part of my own neurodivergency is I haven't necessarily always I'll just think of that one on the spot and I'll be like, okay, now I need to record one of these. But
Yeah.
that chapter came out of the fact we we will have people say when they come to church that it's maybe a little more welcoming than usual to um uh neurodivergent uh people.
Hmm.
Um we think that that has come at least in part out of the fact that we're very much made up of our community is very full of LGBTQ people. We have a number of programs at our church that are especially queer focused, like a summer queer camp for youth. And we know that like around a third of the people that attend worship are LGBTQ. And what I always joke with people is that the Venn diagram, especially at queer camp, of neurodivergent and queer is basically a circle. Like that's just part of the identity.
Yep.
So we've become more alerted to that than maybe some other communities.
Mm.
And then we've gotten more intentional about it also. So some examples. Uh, One example is at the queer camp, we always have a sensory room so that some of our campers who need to get away from the kind of the busyness and the noise of the camp experience have a really good and safe place to go. And then we've extended that into having like a sensory room space in the church more generally that people can access. Um, in fact, I had just was talking with a family this week who we had to do some moving around of rooms. And so I've got this one parent who really wants to help make this space better for their autistic child. So we're intentional about that. And I think the one big step that is the first step for most churches is just going to even be being intentional about it at all,
Mhm.
even recognizing that it's a thing. But then when you talk with people who are aware of it and attending to it, they have a lot of ideas around ways to provide resources from, having weighted blankets in the back of the church to um, just being aware of the way noise or sound impacts different worshipers, etc. So that's what
Right.
that sort of kind of went over a little bit.
Yeah, is very helpful, and I'm just right before our conversation, I'm working with our communications team at our church, and we're finalizing a revision of our website, and I realize I did not we're starting to take steps into that, being more neurodivergent friendly. We've got fidgets, a big basket of fidgets, from where people can walk in and, grab something, um, and there's much more to do there, but I realized we did not mention that in our kind of what it's like to worship with us. So thank you for that reminder. I have an action item after we get off the call. But I wanted to kind of ask you, you're here as yourself and also as a pastor who serves a community, so you can kind of approach this question from either direction. But when did you kind of get tuned in to this idea of there being a divergence in how people's brains worked, maybe through your own? I mean, you made a reference somewhat lightheartedly to your own neurodivergence. You can go there if you'd like, or just talk generally about how did this idea of there being the desire and the interest in accommodating others and making room at the table for everyone. How is there a place where that maybe started?
I I don't have a diagnosis myself. People have always said to me in a variety of different spaces that I must be adjacent in some way.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I don't know what that is. But kids at camp will often tease me about being like, if there's not something there, then
Right.
what even is going on? But um, I I think that the this was the moment where it kind of clicked for me in some new ways. About 5 years ago, no, actually 6 years ago now, we started Queer Camp. It was the year that Arkansas led the way in the country on legislation trying to deny access to healthcare for trans youth. And we had a couple of parishioners in the congregation who were receiving health care. And so they filed a lawsuit together with some other teams against the state around the denial of that access. And so it was a very stressful time that spring as the state was really targeting trans young people in particular. And so we decided to do the camp. I started talking with people. We One of the things we identified as having something to look forward to in the summer was actually going to be really good for people who were really stressed out and having all kinds of thoughts. So we put the camp together. We're surprised by the number of people that participated. We had about 80 kids that summer at camp, which is just wild if you think about it. A LGBTQ affirming youth camp in Arkansas with 80 kids was big. And after camp, after I'd spent that week with that group, and also remember that this was kind of pandemic between part one and part two. Yeah, that was the summer when we actually could meet before there was a resurgence and everybody had to remask and there was
Yep.
a bunch of different steps then. I went to a football game
Mhm.
in the fall. My kids are in marching band. And so I was out pushing some percussion equipment around on the field, and we're at this football game. Uh, Fireworks are going off, and I'm like low key panicking periodically as they go off at times I'm not expecting. And I'm looking around at the football area, the fans, the field, everything, and I'm like, this is so um, gender binary. It's so putting people into either of these categories of this is how you portray yourself as a man or a boy, this is how you portray yourself as a woman or a female or a girl, in so many different ways. And I never had noticed it quite so much as having had that camp experience where I was with kids all week long who that was oppressive to them, to have to live in a society that was so pressuring you to conform to one or the other of those. And so it was eye opening on both levels. It was eye opening to me about, wow, how are people who have sensory issues dealing with spaces like this? And then also, how are you supposed to be in a space like this if you don't conform to the gender binaries that are kind of forced at a football game? So it was a really eye opening moment for me.
Mm, I love that. I love that. Um, Living as you do in Arkansas and ministering there, I mean, there's a sense when we realize that there is this kind of dominant script that I think many aspects of culture want us to just slide into, right? And that can especially be the case when you're in a church like yours that is in some ways bucking the the dominant narrative in the state
Mm.
that you're in. What talk about what's hard about? I mean, that what where do those pain points kind of show up for you? What have been some of the consequences or impacts of trying to lift up a different way, hosting this camp, you know, speaking about these issues?
Well, one thing that's interesting is we got to the point where we were able to host a camp like this through some things over the many previous years.
Mhm.
So on some levels, it isn't that hard because we have created a bubble, like a safety bubble, uh, to a degree. Um, if I um, send a poster out to, there's a, I don't know if you're familiar with, or if your public schools use Peach Jar, but it's like a tool that a lot of public schools use to set so that communication stuff can go out to students and families about programs that they can get involved in the
Yeah.
community. So if I upload a poster about queer camp to that and it hits the whole group, there will be some responses, mostly that the public school field, because the people will blame the public school for sending out like a queer affirming poster, not realizing it's a portal for everything, including also invitations to, conservative Christian Bible camps.
Right.
So there'll be some of that kind of stuff, but it's all kind of buffered and a little distant from us because we really have created this um, space that's profoundly queer centering and affirming. To get there, we did have to go through some really rough patches. I've been here a long time, so I've been here about 15 years, and in about 3 years into being here, we had a big church split over same gender marriage when I officiated some. And so I'm not saying that I didn't have to go through a lot at some points, but now, this is the kind of thing that I think I try to communicate with people. Whatever the Southern mentality was that everybody stereotypes the South as, that's now it's everywhere. You can meet um, really biased, bigoted people in New York City. I was just there last month and had this long conversation in a coffee shop with a gay man who kept explaining to me why he didn't understand trans identity. Like,
Mhm.
why do people choose to be the other gender? And I'm like, you're a gay man
Mhm. Yeah.
who what was doubted when you were young about your sexual orientation, and now you're repeating the same, trope now as an older man sitting in a coffee shop in New York. I didn't quite get it. It was kind of weird.
Mhm.
But, I go back to Iowa where I grew up, and it's as red as Arkansas is. So I think one of the things that I sometimes overcoming in Arkansas is trying to convince people that it's not just Arkansas. It's like, everywhere.
Mhm.
It is true though that one of the biggest things that a lot of our young people and families are dealing with is they're having to decide whether to move
Mhm.
because they don't have access to the care that they need. And so if you are a trans youth, you're having to drive to Illinois regularly to get access to health care, um, or somewhere.
Yeah.
That's the closest state that actually provides legally gender affirming care. And so we are dealing with that. We have a lot of loss of people who are moving um, to places like Massachusetts or
Right.
Oregon or Washington State. So there is that phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking about the bubble and then kind of adding this layer of there is a cultural bubble and a sense of safety that you're able to manage
Hmm.
and curate, if you will, in your relationships and partnerships that you're connected to. And there's a limit to that bubble too, right? As you've said, there are
Yeah.
places all over where I mean, and people where you're gonna run into folks who are like, I just don't get it. There's two genders, and that's just the way it always has been, and the way it always needs to be. And so, but I think that the value of that bubble is really high. I mean, just being able to have a place where people feel safe. And so I like to ask people, are there values or practices that kind of help you do this work or help
Hmm.
you live in the world as a pastor, proclaiming a different way, providing hospitality in a different way for people. But besides that bubble, which is very important, and I've heard that as a through line in this series, is having others around you that affirm that, yeah, this larger cultural kind of stuff is messed up. It shouldn't be that way, and we can do better. And that helps. But are there other things that you rely on as practices or values or other things that sustain you in this work?
Well, yeah, and the other thing is part of the staying and creating the bubbles is that um, not everybody's mobile. So there's a
Mhm.
wide variety of reasons why a lot of people have to stay where they are,
Yeah.
from a lack of economic mobility to, you know, family or any number of reasons. And so having developing places like this in place all over is really important right now.
Right. So could we say that another maybe value or practice that is important to you is a sense of personal vocation? I mean, that this is important work that you're doing, and you could be part of that place of sanctuary for people who don't have that flexibility.
Yeah. Oh, for sure that. Yes. I uh I think I've always thought of myself as, on some levels, I'm a missionary who happens to be a pastor. I'm a weird
Mhm.
kind of missionary because I'm not much into direct overt proselytizing.
Yes. Thank
Um,
you.
uh, but I would be dishonest if I didn't say that one of my goals was to at least create the situation where people think that the church could be a safe place for them,
Mhm.
even if that doesn't mean that they're going to become religious.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of what we do. I love bringing together, creating these safe spaces for people,
Mhm.
and that it's at the church.
Right.
Um, and it and churches have a real opportunity, partially because of the resources they have. When
Mhm.
we started this camp, how expensive it would have been if we had to like rent someplace for the whole week or whatever. But we have a campus here, and we can
Yeah.
put on these programs, and that's made the camp be really incredibly inexpensive compared to a lot of other stuff in the region.
Yeah.
And that's important with this cohort. Like a third to a half of our campers come on a scholarship of some kind. And so,
Okay. Wow. I'm curious, and I certainly want to honor the safety and anonymity of the campers, but I'm curious if there's a story of an impact that the camp has had or a tale of transformation, which, like you, I don't think that necessarily needs to mean transformed into becoming a Christian. But are there some stories that kind of sustain you of a difference that you have seen the camp make?
Hmm. Well, I mean, the biggest thing that has been the surprise about the camp, um, it really shouldn't be a surprise, but it was the same summer that we did the camp that I saw this movie for the first time. I don't know if you've ever seen Crip Camp.
I haven't.
It's a
We'll link to that in the show
documentary.
notes also. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a documentary about what was called Crip Camp, and it was a camp for disabled people that was started like in the I'm not going to necessarily get the dates right, but I think in the early 1960s,
Okay.
and so it was very hippie-ish because of the era.
Mhm.
That camp became influential in building the community that then advocated for the Disability Rights Amendment, which has had such a huge
Yeah.
impact on our country.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And so you think a camp is just a camp, it's like just this 1 week thing, but it builds these kinds of relationships that are really powerful and sustaining, and there can be things that emerge. So one of the things that we've seen come out of our camp is the first couple of years we did it, we were always like, oh, we had the camp and now, oh, we'll see you, next summer.
Uh-huh.
But now we have things kind of year round. We do camp minis. We have a weekly Wednesday night gathering where a bunch of the kids that come to the camp come out for the Wednesday night gathering, and it's built a community. It's a network,
Yeah.
and so that's probably been the biggest and most surprising emergence from the camp. Um, and the other one that I see that's really wild is how people relax when they're among their own people. So repeatedly, I'll hear from parents who bring their kids to camp for the first time, and they'll write me later in the week, or whatever, and they'll say like, they were super nervous. They didn't know about this, and then they came home the first day or the second day, and I've never seen them so themselves and happy. And it's not necessarily that we're putting on this amazing program. It's more just that they get to hang out with 60 kids who are also like them
Mhm.
on some levels, or not really not like them on another level, but you know what I mean.
Right. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, the freedom to be yourself, which
Hmm.
means there's 60 very distinct individuals from one another, right? Yeah, I love that. One of our listeners who's tuning in live, I assume that YouTube link is to the Crypt Camp documentary. I will check that out later. So for those who are, or something else, but there it is. Thank you for
Without looking, who knows?
that's right. It could be anything. But yeah, thank you for that. We'll make sure to link to it in the recording afterward. I'm curious, Clint, in this journey, sometimes in my co-host in another podcast that I do, he really had an evolution. I mean, he started out in ministry, or I guess before he went to seminary, fairly conservative, pretty what some would call traditional values in terms of LGBTQ identity, and has been on his own journey of evolution and is in full allied support, or at least seeks to be. We all do our best, and it's up to others to say whether we're a good ally or not. But I'm curious if that is part of your story as well, or has this always been part of your understanding of the gospel and who we're called to be, and so.
uh, yeah, I I grew up on a farm in Iowa.
Mm.
And I always joke with people, but it's not seriously. I spent a lot of time when I was in high school driving a tractor and listening to Rush Limbaugh.
Mhm.
Um, my my grandpa was a Republican state representative in the Iowa legislature for most of my growing up. So I was raised in um, very Republican space.
Mhm.
But for one, Republican in the 1980s is really different than Republican in the 2020s. So that's one thing. Um, like what my grandpa was committed to when he was in the legislature, it's just it doesn't even hardly register like now with how Republicans it would drive him crazy that there's a $40 trillion deficit right now and that the
Yes,
Republicans
that's
have been
made the news. Yeah.
contributed to it
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
as just one example. And so I went to college. I still held those values um, for the most part. My first year of college, I'm kind of thankful that the internet hadn't taken off quite yet. This is 1991 because I wrote a few columns for the newspaper where I was upset about things related to too much queer affirmation on our Luther College campus. And then I started to make friends with uh, classmates who were LGBTQ. And um, by my senior year, I was the church council president for Luther College, and we led the process of having Luther become a reconciling in Christ congregation, which was one of the first ones in Iowa. And since then, I've always been very much involved in um, kind of the movement for inclusion in different ways. And really interestingly, my family's to a degree, has been along on that journey also. So I don't really know what political party my parents would align with now exactly, but I do know that they're really radically affirming also. And although they were Republican until recently, uh, uh, my dad did tell me this last election that Trump finally made him do something that he thought he would never do in his life, which is he voted for a Democrat for president.
Right.
Um,
Oh my goodness.
so I've lived this interesting life where I have family who actually got out. You know, they could have gone the
Mhm.
mega cult route and they didn't. They're maybe conservative, but don't know what their party is anymore. So that's kind of but I've been radically into it for a long time. And so
Yeah.
I'm kind of adopted into that community, even though I don't necessarily identify as,
Mhm.
or I don't identify as queer.
Mhm.
The, the,
Mhm.
the kids joke with me every year. They make me a button that just says token straight.
Excellent. Which makes you queer in that space, right? I mean, that's
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm an outlier for sure. Yeah.
right, the outlier, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and it's worth remembering, of course, trans issues are such a hot button right now, and, politicians make hay about it for their own kind of, partisan purposes, but my read of a lot of public opinion is that even trans rights, which is still so hotly debated, are fairly. I mean, you can talk about sports, and sometimes there's some variation there, but people in general across the spectrum feel like they deserve dignity and the ability to be themselves. I mean, there are varying levels of support, but it's. I think the public conversation belies a more general sense of just let people live their lives. I mean, that's maybe easier for me to say. I live in a more affirming area than perhaps you do, but I think if you ask a lot of individuals, even if they're wearing a certain jersey, they might be like, whatever. There are some very loud voices that
Well, that definitely
really don't.
used to be more of the culture of the South and really even of rural Iowa where I grew up, the live and let live, the don't
Yeah,
tread on me kind of philosophy,
right. Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
was used to be pretty common. It seems to be that as we have slowly been adopting authoritarianism, people are a little more comfortable
yeah,
controlling other people's lives as long as it doesn't yet control their lives, I guess.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, and I'm curious how you feel about this, but my hope, the hope that I'm living into in this moment is that this is a an extinction burst, a kind of last, maybe not last gasp, but a gasp of a way of life that is passing away.
Hmm.
And those realities don't die easily. And I'm not saying that we're just right on the verge. I mean, we could be in this last sort of, attempt to assert heteropatriarchy for, I mean, it could be decades still, but I think ultimately what's on the other side of that is a more liberated world.
Mm.
Again, it's my I believe help my unbelief because I want that to be true and I hope that that is true, and so I live as if it is, because otherwise I think it grants them too much power to say that they're going to prevail. I don't think they will. A bunch of people will probably be hurt in the process in the meantime, but I
There
think
is a
this is
pen.
not the
We're definitely a pendulum country,
hmm
so I am hoping that we're going to see a shift.
right.
Um, I don't know what to do with the a way in which that pendulum shift. I think the way it's going to work is the country as a whole may swing a different way politically, but I think that the dominant form of Christianity in the United States is going to keep swinging that other way, even when it swings back this way, because what you see statistically is moderate growth of the conservative Christian church, and then on the left, people are just leaving.
Yeah, that's true.
So those are the numbers. That's
Mhm.
why am have written like the book that I did and am committed to this, because and communicating about this is I totally believe that you shouldn't let the abuse of something disallow its appropriate use. And I think churches are amazing. And just because people are misusing churches doesn't mean that we can't claim church for the right purposes. And I see it all the time, what good church community can do, what good um, inclusive Christianity can be in people's lives. And so I'm not willing to let go of that just because it seems like the larger group right now is all going off in this one way.
Yeah,
Um,
well said.
I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. You make me think of, I don't know, did you ever watch the television series Watchmen?
I haven't watched that now.
Uh, it in the it's a DC kind of
Right.
uh fantasy future where Robert Redford had become president and took the country in this incredibly liberal direction, including they did like African American reparations, and the
Oh,
country
wow.
gave money back to African American communities,
Uh-huh.
which royally like angered white supremacists in the country. So then there's this huge, massive reaction, and that's where you end up with all, all these masked police officers, and it's a pretty wild show. Um, but uh, the, when you take things a long ways quickly, there is a reaction. And I do think that I
Yeah.
agree with you that like what we're seeing right now is a reaction to the fact that we really did move stuff along. The whole introduction of what pissed people off, like say pronouns
Mhm.
or all these surface things that had an impact on now what people are trying to push back on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Hard. They're pushing back
Yes.
hard.
Right. Right. But pushing back, it's in many ways a reaction to something, and the question then becomes, and we'll just have to see, who knows, but like, is that in an inexorable move towards a more broadly inclusive world? And I mean, just recently, in fact, you may have posted this. I don't remember where I saw it, but fully a third of young people in this country identify as queer in some way. It's a huge
Yeah.
number, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't think that these culture war battles are going to change that. I think that's people say sometimes demographics is destiny, and that is a little overinflated. But I do think that that's the reality for many of the young people that we come in
That is
contact with.
interesting. I hadn't seen that full statistic yet, although I would believe it because there was always the numbers that we talked about in the past when it wasn't yet okay to be out of the closet, where they'd always talk about like 10%, but
Yeah.
that was just people coming out mostly as gay or lesbian, and now that
Mhm.
you have this much bigger spectrum of I just dropped my daughter off at Bowdoin college. He's starting there this fall, and they gave some statistics in the like speech to the parents as we were dropping them off, and one of the statistics was that I think it was 40. I don't remember the other two numbers. I just remember that they said that 6% of the student body identified as non-binary.
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
So then, yeah, then they gave like, so they were giving like male, female, and
Yeah.
non-binary, and then they were
Right.
giving out statistics too about like what countries they come from and states. 47 states
Yeah.
go to Bowdoin College. It's kind of wild, but yeah, 6% is
Yeah.
that's nothing to scoff at in terms of a total percentage of a student body,
Yep.
and you have to build out resources for that. That
Mhm.
if that's who your student makeup is, and so you see. Um, signage has to be different. You have to build
Mhm.
certain kinds of facilities a little differently.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, final question that I try to ask everyone in this series is what would you say to someone who is just right now in that gap
Okay.
between what culture wants them to be and who they know themselves to be? And I would add the layer if they don't live in the greater Fayetteville area and have access to a queer camp or whatever sort of what would you say to someone? What would you offer someone who's living in that kind of painful gap in reality?
Mm. Hmm. Well, you're making me think of a story about someone that is a parishioner here who's living in that back and forth and is telling the story kind of well right now.
Mm.
I have a member who came out when they were still in late high school, and as soon as they turned 18, they moved out of a very culty, kind of abusive family structure in Mountain Home, Arkansas, and came and lived with a family here in Fayetteville that was supportive of them and affirming, and kind of adopted them as an adult child. And the way that they describe that is it's really and I've observed this, it's a long process. When you've been trained your whole life to conform to certain ways, and like we recently had a going away party for them because now they moved back to Mountain Home because they're doing study there in nursing school, and they have more access to scholarship resources. So this is all loaded and freighted with risk and emotions and everything because now they're leaving this community that they built and going back to where they had come from, reconnecting with family and all that. They're having to navigate that. And um, so they discovered a lot of things when they were here. They discovered new things over time about themselves, which I think a big part of this. You're not always going to know everything right away. That's okay. You may start out thinking you're trans and then move into thinking that it's more of a non-binary thing. And because maybe some of your initial thoughts are reactions, and then some of your thoughts are finally, who really am I? So that's a process. Um, But then those spaces that you came from, or if you're still in a space like that, I really do think that people are right to think about their safety first, you know?
Yeah.
So like if you're feeling guilt that you're just not coming out and living your completely transparently, there's a reason why your gut is telling you not to do that because you may not be safe. And so, um, you know, process that. Um, But then as they have been going back to their home, it's been interesting how the freedom that they got in living in this community for a while has helped them relate to that differently. They can laugh at some of it. They can see the ridiculousness of some of it. They can identify the culty aspects of it. They can push back more freely. Um, and there's been even a kind of if you think the person you're with is just biased but still safe, there's a real interesting way you can relate to that. It's like it's one thing if you're going into a space that's genuinely abusive, that you should just try to get safe as soon as you can. But if you're just going back, and like in this case, to live with a grandparent who doesn't believe in the same thing you believe, you can talk about that and tease one another about it. And that's some of the stuff that I've seen them do. That's kind of um, Okay, that's a story. I don't know if that's any kind of advice,
Oh,
but
no,
reality.
it's a beautiful, to me, it's a parable, right? Of relationship, the healing that came from being in a supportive community that bolsters them to be able to go back to this other place that's not universally supportive. The power of
Mhm.
trusting yourself, tuning into your body, those messages. I mean, there's a lot in there, Clint. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful response.
Yeah.
Thing.
The other thing it makes me think of, and I've been pondering this a lot lately. I don't have any real cogent thoughts on it yet. I have a friend who is a female drag queen here in
Mm.
Fayetteville, and she posted yesterday and called Dolly Parton the original female drag queen.
Female drag queen, fascinating. Huh.
Um, and my parishioner who went back to Mountain Home, that's one of the things that they do too. So they go to beauty contests um,
Nice.
at which is basically drag for them
Yeah.
because their gender identity does not match their
Mm.
gender assigned at birth. But when they're going and doing the beauty contests, they're
Ugh.
so there's a lot of interesting space for people to own this and repurpose the stereotypes that people push them into. And I think that my friend who pointed that out about Dolly Parton, that's been a lot of the analysis of like, why did she dress like she did and did what she did? It had to do with a lot of stereotypes around her gender and how could a small woman take up room
Yeah.
in her spaces. And that was what she did.
Mm.
Um,
I love that. That's
she had a line, I think, where she said that everybody said, like, that woman, it looks like she dresses like trash, and Dolly's response was, "That's who I wanna be when I grow up," or something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah. If this is
Yeah,
I heard that story too. Like she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I
yeah,
want to emulate her. Yeah.
right.
I love that we brought it around to Dolly. That is the perfect place to stop,
You're
Clint.
welcome.
Thank you. And I so appreciate the work that you're doing. Clint Schnekloth, tell us what the name of your Substack is and the name of the book that you published.
Oh, yeah, Lutheran Confessions. I
Okay.
just had never gotten away from that. I'm a Lutheran
Yeah.
pastor. Lutheran
Hey,
and Confessions is a
stick with the
double
brand, works for
kind
you.
of fun. And then a guidebook to progressive church is my most recent book. I also published a book, which was a lot of fun to do, mediating faith formation in a transmedia era. So I've done a lot of work around like
Nice.
media culture and formation in media spaces. But yeah, people want, and people are certainly welcome to reach out to do stuff with me around that book. It's a pretty it's fun to do in campus context, church context.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Clint. This was a joy to talk with you. I've followed your work for a while, and it's great to have a face to face. And your phone made it all the way through. You
Did
did.
it's really low right now, so it's a
All
good thing.
right. I'm going to let you go so you can plug in. Thank you all for
Okay,
joining us. This will be on replay at the Blue Room for sure. You're welcome to use it as well, Clint. And we'll see
okay,
you all next time.
all right. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.